All right, let's talk about the Minnesota Vikings, who are in a very unique situation. We talk a lot about teams, with sort of the quarterback question is usually how we view things. And for the Vikings, Kirk Cousins has often been considered the kind of figurehead of the quarterback who is a good quarterback, but if you pay him a bunch of money, you're probably not going to go on a deep playoff run with him. And so far, that's proven to be the case. Cousins is a free agent, so they have the opportunity to move off of him if they choose, but would that be the correct strategy? Also, the Vikings were in a situation where despite poor quarterback play for the second half of the season once Cousins went down, we're still nearly a postseason team. So where do they go from here and how do they get better? Well, first, let's talk about where they're currently at. First, let's talk about cap space and cash. So you see this is how much projected millions they have in cap space and cash, and their cap space seems to be pretty, on the lower side, 27 million. That doesn't seem to be great. Their cash, actually pretty good though, over 100 million in projected cash. So while what they have on the books doesn't appear to be great, their owners can certainly go and pay a good amount of money to get more players if they choose to, and just move the cap space down the road, which again is something you can always do. So money wise, they have the money to go out and re-sign some of their free agents. Now that's a good thing because they got some free agents. If we look at their list, the obvious two key guys. There's other players, like Dalton Risner, Jordan Hicks, even like KJ Osborne, I think is a notable guy who you probably want to make sure you keep. And then some guys like, do you keep Dobbs because he looked all right as a backup? Like Marcus Davenport didn't work out, but you keep giving him another year. Davenport's actually a little weird, but I believe he has an option where if you get rid of him for $5 million. So I think he's still technically on the roster, but we don't know if he's going to stay or not. So that's worth noting. But the top two guys, Cousins and Danielle Hunter, which, I think I said midway through last season, I thought that maybe trading away Hunter might have been the right strategy because, like, realistically, last year you weren't going to do a lot. He's going to be an upcoming free agent, get a draft pick for him. But if you did that, you wouldn't really have the opportunity to re-sign him. The question is that something you want to do? Danielle Hunter had a great season. I think some of his sack numbers were a bit inflated, the pressure to sack stuff, just with how often the Vikings blitz. He ended up getting a little bit more sacks than you typically would expect, but he still had a great season. He's still a really good player. So he's someone that you definitely want to make sure that you can keep on the roster. And despite the fact that it feels like he's 90, he's actually still just 29 years old. So giving him a 3-4 year deal is still something you could expect him to play to the end of. I think they probably pay him and keep him around, but I don't know for sure. It's an interesting situation. Or do you maybe say, like, hey, Brian Flores can scheme up pressure. Maybe that's not where we pump a ton of resources into. Kirk Cousins, another interesting guy, where, like I said at the beginning of the video, he's someone who is kind of the figurehead for the quarterback. Well, you can't pay him. You can't go out and give him a big contract. Well, I mean, you can. They did it earlier. But what's interesting is, I know the Vikings are a very analytically inclined front office, and that doesn't always mean that you're going to do everything that analytic heads say you should do, right? Especially one, there still is an owner you have to talk to. It's possible the owner is going to sit here and say, like, no, you gotta keep Cousins because he's good and he sells tickets, so I don't care. You're keeping him. Maybe that's the case. That does happen. I know we like to assume every decision gets made due to football reasons only. That's just not the world we live in. That being said, a lot of analytics inclined people will typically bring up the idea that, like, going out and getting a Kirk Cousins contract usually not the best idea. It just usually isn't. And not because he won't help your team, but because look at what they were able to do with bad quarterback play. If you can go out and get a quarterback who's maybe cheaper, like a Jameis Winston, or maybe that's not the best idea, but like a Gardner Minshew or something, maybe that's actually what could help your team, because you can also, like, for example, we don't know how much they're willing to spend. If they're only willing to spend $35 million, would you rather have a Gardner Minshew, a Danielle Hunter, and maybe KJ Osborne, or just Kirk Cousins? That's where the debate comes in. Maybe the answer is still Kirk Cousins, but it's just an interesting debate, and you have to think Kirk Cousins is about to get $1 billion, and like the $35 million next to his name, that feels low. I think he's getting more than that. They also could cut a couple of players to save some money if they wanted to. Harrison Smith and Harrison Phillips, a couple of Harrisons they could get rid of. Harrison Smith, obviously great player, but is getting up there in age. Perhaps you get rid of these guys if you want to. Again, not saying you should, just this is another option. They could clear up $18 million by getting rid of a couple of Harrisons here. So the kind of final chart, and to be honest, they're in a really unique scenario that they're going to have a decision to make here of $24 million in cap space. Okay, that's not ideal, but you have $107 million in cash. The cost to re-sign all their free agents would be almost that, $89 million. Do you completely spend against the cap and say, you know what, if we can add a couple of extra wins, we're a playoff team? That's definitely something you look at, and they could even save another $18 million by clearing some stuff up. I do wonder, again, to me, there's several ways you could take this. This team could look completely different than they were last year, or exactly the same, or they could look completely different on defense, but look exactly the same on offense. They could look completely different on offense, but look exactly the same on defense. I think, the Brian Flores hire has been great, and the nice thing about him suing the NFL, obviously there's a lot of unfortunate things about that, but the nice thing for the Vikings is they might sit here and say, well, maybe no one's going to give him a head coaching job anytime soon. We can keep a great defensive coordinator for a while. There's that opportunity. The important aspect of that is maybe you don't pay, like I said, maybe you don't pay Danielle Hunter, and while I wouldn't like letting him walk, maybe you do a tag and trade scenario. Maybe you franchise tag him and then trade him to a team that's willing to give you a first round pick for him. Something like that. So that way you're not just losing him for nothing, but also you can use that money elsewhere. You keep Kirk Cousins and you hope that you can get similar defensive value, although obviously losing Hunter would hurt. There's no denying that. Maybe you draft a replacement and, you have money to spend on other pieces. So there's definitely, some intrigue to be had. I do think that on paper, again, if Cousins is there, this should be a really good offense. The defense was good last year. For me personally, I kind of think maybe I just keep the status quo and hope that things can work out better. Again, I don't know if losing Cousins for half of a season is the difference between making being a non-playoff team to like winning a Super Bowl. So I think that's kind of the issue. But I just think they're in such a unique scenario where they could go so many different ways, and at the same time, they're also in a situation where they're front office that you kind of trust would do things differently and would go in maybe a way that someone else wouldn't go. So I wouldn't be shocked if they let Cousins walk. And to be honest, that might be the better move. It would hurt them short term, might help them long term. But again, the question is, what if Brian Flores gets a head coaching job next year? Now you've lost that positive asset. How, good is, with everything else you have around you, like how long is that going to last? You're going to have to pay Jefferson soon. You should pay him immediately. He's amazing. Like you should keep him for, he should be a Viking forever, you would think. So they're in an interesting spot right here. Do you get worse so that way you can get better, or do you just focus on being better right now? I really don't know. I'm glad I don't have to make that call. What do you think about the Vikings situation? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.